Good morning. This is Up Before the BS, episode 4, um, January 2nd of this glorious year, 2026, rather. Today, we are on the topic of authority, which is one of my favorites, so it'll be a little bit rebellious, a little bit crazy, a little bit outside the norm. So we'll just have fun with it a little bit, if you guys don't mind. I want to preface this with, again, this is kind of my rules that I made, and I don't think they're universal, and I'm not prescribing that everyone follow my example. It's just 40 things that I noticed from my writing and my journey through last year. And there are 40 rules that I'm done following and 40 vows that I'm making to replace them instead of New Year's resolutions. So, it's not a challenge, it's not a program, and it's not me teaching anyone how to fix anything because really don't think we're broken to begin with. Day 1 was about gratitude. Day 2 was about being low maintenance. Day 3 was about consistency, which is fitting because I'm being anything but consistent. So I'm breaking that rule quite well. No problems with that one. Today is day 4. It's about questioning an authority. And this is one of my favorite topics to speak on. It's one of my favorite topics to write on because I think authority is one of those things that I was programmed to accept. I think many people are. And I get to be a little sarcastic and a little absurd with it because I think in today's environment it fits. Because when we think of authority, naturally we think of government, and to be honest, we're governed by imbeciles. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as an observable fact, as diagnosis. The same way a coroner identifies the cause of death. We are governed by absolute imbeciles. And I don't mean on the Republican side, and I don't mean on the Democratic side. I mean across the board. These are people making decisions about your health and your money and your children and your ability to keep a roof over your head. The people with the institutional power to absolutely screw your life up. And they screw it up in ways that you can't unscrew. And they didn't get there because they're competent. They got there because they learned to look competent. Because they got there to look, or they got there because they look competent. And that's a difference. That's a huge difference. It's almost incomprehensible because competence is what you do when no one's looking. And performance is what you do when everyone is. And we have built an entire economy, an entire civilization indeed, on performance. And I'm not talking just about government there. I'm talking about across the board again. Let's look in the business world because, I'm going to be sarcastic and I'm going to be a little bit absurd on this, and I get to touch on some of my favorite things because you know what qualifies people for a position of authority now? It's a perfect resume or a perfect LinkedIn feed. More and more we see jobs that ask for your LinkedIn profile. And I've often wondered, why do you want to look at my social media profile? And it's because they're auditioning you. And they're not auditioning you for the job. They're not auditioning you for competence. They're auditioning you for the performance of competence or the illusion of competence. For your illusion to photograph yourself with your laptop and your coffee at what may be early in the morning and make it look like some productivity gospel. They're not looking at your ability to do the work. They don't call references anymore. They're looking at your ability to appear capable of doing the work. It's all about the appearance. It's the act. it's the show. You know, in bygone eras, we had humans masquerading as clowns, and now it's the other way around. We have absolute clowns that are masquerading as humans, frauds masquerading as experts, performers masquerading as the competent. And I don't think that's an entirely new thing. I think it's a new thing in the era of social media and the era of the internet, where people can absolutely get out there and profess to be an expert at something they have really no authority in, no actual training in, or any competence in. And it's gotten to where we can't tell the difference anymore because the performance has become indistinguishable from the real thing. Actually, that's not true. The performance has replaced the real thing. You don't need to know how to do the job. You need to know about how to talk about doing the job, how to post about doing the job, how to write about doing the job, how to turn a mediocre career into a narrative of resilience and growth, and how to take a layoff and spin it into a teaching moment, or how to brand your breakdown or your divorce or turn your miscarriage into engagement content. And I have seen this. I have seen women take a miscarriage or some tragic event and turn it into engagement context or content, which to me, to each their own, so you do what you want to. But to me, it's a little bit sickening to me. I'm humbled to announce, no, no, you're not. You're watching the analytics. You're refreshing the post every 30 seconds. You're praying that someone with hiring power is watching you perform this vulnerability in exactly the right way. And it's not humility, it's theater. And theater is what gets you a job. It's what gets you elected now. It's what gets you a position of authority now. It's not results. It's not a track record. It's not even proof that you know what you're doing. We have people that come from absolute insane places to become leaders in government. They have no training. They have no competence in what they're doing. They have no background in what they're doing, but they are allowed to decide policy for you. They are the authorities over our life. These are the people that are elected to the school boards. These are people that are elected to the governorship. These are people that are elected to mayors because they sound good. And, whether you agree with him or whether you don't agree with him, I'm not getting into the politics of it. I'm just saying, for the last 12 years, it feels like we've had the first social media presidents. And, I go back and say, when we turn the presidency into a popularity contest, we're already circling the drain, no matter which side you go with. So, again, the ability to sound like you know what you're doing, to look sure, to deploy the right buzzwords with enough confidence, and confidence is key here, that nobody checks whether you've actually ever done the thing that you're claiming expertise in. You can go out there and claim to be the world's greatest businessman and be terrible at business. You can claim to be a brilliant doctor or psychiatrist. There are a couple of those out there. And have no credentials in that field. No real success in that field. No success in diagnosis or healing people. But you get to influence and in some cases define what policy is for the rest of us. This is what passes for authority today. And these people, if they do that convincingly enough, they get promoted to these positions of authority. Even if, and maybe even more so, if they're a fraud. Now think about that. It might be especially if you're a fraud. Because the people that actually know things, they hesitate. They say it depends. They'll admit when they're unsure. But that doesn't get promoted, and it doesn't win elections, and it doesn't close deals or land clients or make you look visionary. on a panel when you're speaking about the future of work or the future of the country or the future of your life. We don't hire the knowledgeable, we hire the convincing. We don't elect the competent, we elect the confident. And we give power to people who have mastered the art and the performance of faking it. Because that's what we know in our lives. And then we act shocked when the entire country or the entire city or when everything starts burning down. You know, in the past, you had to have something underneath a performance, some substance, some proof you could actually do the thing you were claiming to do before you were promoted to a position of authority. The performance was the window dressing, it was the marketing, it was a way to package real competence so people could see it. And now that performance is the competence. The resume, flawless. The LinkedIn profile is curated to absolute perfection. And you know this to be true. There are thousands of sites and thousands of Substacks and blogs about how to build the perfect LinkedIn. Not how to succeed at your job, not how to become competent at your job. How to build the perfect image of being competent at your job. Our feeds are full of carefully crafted posts about lessons learned and growth mindsets and pivoting through adversity. But there's absolutely nothing behind it because most of these people haven't pivoted through adversity. They've become experts at pretending they pivoted through adversity. They don't even know what adversity is. Most of our elected officials have no idea what adversity is. They've never struggled to feed or clothe or provide medical care to a child. They've never struggled in their life, but they can perform it to such an extent that we believe it. It's clowns all the way up the chain and all the way back down again. People who have learned to mimic the language of expertise without having any at all. People who can sound authoritative without ever being right. People who've mastered the appearance of leadership without ever leading anyone anywhere, except maybe off a cliff. And we can't tell the difference because we stopped checking. We see the credentials and the letters after their name and we assume competence. We see the title and assume they earned it. We see the performance and assume that there's some substance underneath. Because the tragedy is we doubt ourselves more than we doubt other people. But there isn't any substance in a lot of them. It's just clowns in suits. It's frauds in blazers. It's performers who have learned that if you fake it convincingly enough, nobody asks you to make it. They'll never ask you to perform. They just want the act. And really, what do credentials provide now? That you successfully navigated an institutional system designed by people with the same credentials? Yeah, that's about it. That's about what our schooling is now. A degree doesn't mean you're smart. It means you learned the language long enough to get a piece of paper that says you learned their way of speaking. It doesn't mean you earned it. It means you were in the classroom when they needed to fill a seat and you looked like what they thought the person in that seat should look like. 20 years of experience doesn't mean you're good at what you do. It means you've been doing it for 20 years. You may have been doing it badly. You may be completely incompetent, but you're consistent. And I do want to pause here and talk about that because we go to doctors and nobody, me included, ever thinks to look up the guy's real history and think maybe the guy I'm going to was in the bottom 5% of his class. Maybe the guy that I went to is an imbecile and he just flubbed his way through it. And he's got a a history of malpractice and he's got a history of dropping the ball. Or we go to a mechanic and we assume because it says ASC and he's got all the banners on the wall that he knows what he's doing. When really, his manner is just taking everything off the car until something works and then claiming genius. None of it proves competence. It proves that they're legible, that they're understandable, that they learned how to look the part and sound the part and play the game. And that's enough for us now. I'm not saying some of them didn't earn it. I think there's some brilliant doctors. I think there's brilliant mechanics. I think there's brilliant people in every line of work. I just think the system now has been set up for the performance and the appearance rather than the academic and real world accountability. They're those people aren't in our office though, and they aren't driving policy because these are the people again that are the people that doubt, that question, that stand in front of a room of people and say, sometimes I don't know. And we have learned not to listen to those people. We have learned not to listen to the people that question things. We have learned not to listen to people that wonder, maybe this isn't the answer, because that's the entire thing that drove our species from crawling out of the ooze to now, is wondering and questioning and asking the right questions. Not, I know. If we knew and we stopped learning, we would have stopped at fire and we'd have stopped at the spear and we'd have stopped at living in caves. Again, but we can't tell anymore because the frauds have gotten so good at the performance that they're indistinguishable from the real thing. Now, no, they're better than the real thing because the real thing is actually too busy working to spend 16 hours or 8 hours, even 2 hours a day curating their LinkedIn feed. They're too busy to write books on it. They're too busy to go out there and create an entire social media profile around vaccines or around whatever the case may be about the economy. They're too busy. And if you think about it, really the only place in our society where these people can exist is the very top, where they have the time to perpetuate this fraud, because the rest of us are busy working. Now, there's a personal story, and this came from my mother. My mother worked for a company for years. She knew this job cold. She could do it drunk, not that she drank. She could do it asleep. She could do it one-handed. She could do this job. It amazed me, because I'm not a math whiz, the things my mother can do with math. But, my mother was really good at it. But then they hired a man. They hired a new boss. And my mother, who knew everything about that job, who'd been doing it successfully for years, was told that she needed to train him on a job that she was doing, the job he was hired to lead, the job that he knew absolutely nothing, I shouldn't say nothing, he probably had a little bit of knowledge, but he didn't know how to do this job because she needed to train him. And then, naturally she wonders, why is this guy more qualified if I've got to train him? And, their answer is not because he's got a penis and you don't. That no job is going to be that honest. But that's the fact of the matter is, this guy had a different set of genitalia than my mother. And that makes him leadership material. That makes him boss material. And, they probably said it was that. It was management experience. It was all the corporate euphemisms they look for. And that he looks like what we think a leader should look like. And you don't. So she trained him. She taught him everything she knows. She taught him how to do the work and manage the systems, how to lead a team. And more importantly, how not to burn the whole place down while he was doing it. And then she watched him get promoted for the work that she taught him how to do. This is what authority looks like in the modern age. Not competence, not expertise, not decades of proven results. Image. If you look like what people think authority should look like, and let's be honest, that's white, male, tall, deep voice, firm handshake, eye contact that borders on aggression, you get authority. Now, it doesn't matter if you're incompetent. It doesn't matter if everyone around you knows that you're incompetent. You look the part. And that to me is the biggest absurdity, is that when these things burn down and when they fall down, everybody climbs out of the woodwork and says, we know the guy was an idiot. We know he was incompetent. We knew he was incompetent all along, but you followed him. One is because you got rewarded. Yeah, two, it's because you at some points bought into this performance. And that's the problem now. In a world where performance has replaced substance, looking the part is the part. The people who actually know what they're doing, they're training the fraud. Then they watch him take the credit. They watch him fail upward while they stay exactly where they are. They get to keep training because they're experts at training, and the competence that they show doesn't get them promoted because they can't perform. And the frauds are better at performing than the competent are at the doing. That's where we are. So that's where this came from for me. Don't question authority. It's another rule that we're sold when we're young. We should trust the experts. We should trust the credentialed. We should trust those with titles, the peoples with degrees and experience, and yeah, impressive LinkedIn profiles. If we look out there and they got a bunch of initials and a bunch of titles and they got 40,000 followers, well, they must know what they're talking about. They must know better than you. You're a nobody. You don't have credentials. You don't have a platform. You're just some person with a gut feeling that something's wrong. What do you know? So you defer, you follow, you trust. Even when the doctor dismisses your pain and tells you it's just anxiety. Even when the financial advisor bankrupts you chasing a commission. Even when your therapist gaslights you into thinking your anger is the problem instead of what caused it. And even when the boss works you into dust, he works you into the ground and tells you it's opportunity. Even when the politicians, and they do this every day to us, they sell us out and they blame us for not voting hard enough. They blame us for not keeping up with things. They blame us for not being patriotic or loyal or democratic or Republican enough. We trust them because they have credentials and you don't. Because questioning authority means you're difficult, you're paranoid, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're somebody who just doesn't understand how things work. That's what we've built. But you know what? They don't understand how things work either. They just learned how to sound like they understand how things work. And I think by this point, we've proven that's actually the case. I don't need to convince you of that. You know that. And there's a reason they don't want you questioning authority. Not because they're always right, because they cannot survive these questions. They cannot survive real questions. They can survive the polite softballs they're prepared. They can survive the flattering interviews, but they can't survive the ones that actually matter. Like, what's your track record on this? Who benefits if I do what you're telling me? And what aren't you telling me? Or the best one yet, prove it. Prove it to me. Ask those and the performance collapses. Most authority isn't built on competence. It's built on your assumption that we're not allowed to ask. And we know this. We know this. We know the people in charge are often frauds. We know credentials don't guarantee competence. We know the whole system runs on performance, on image, on the collective agreement not to say out loud that the emperor has no clothes. But we can't admit it. Because admitting it means admitting that no one's driving the bus. That the experts that we have been trusting are just clowns in suits who learn to sound authoritative. And that to me, is terrifying. It terrifies me that there are clowns, again, on both sides, I'm not arguing sides, with their fingers on the nuclear trigger. It terrifies me that we're promoting people to run nuclear submarines and some of the largest businesses and institutions in our country that are absolute frauds. They have killed the housing market twice. They've run our economy into the ground multiple times. They've absolutely killed many of the institutions and businesses in this country, and yet we still celebrate them. Not only do we celebrate them, we've been instrumental in keeping them there. So we keep pretending and we keep deferring. We keep trusting people who perform certainty while having absolutely zero idea what they're doing. Because trusting ourselves, and I really need you to think about this, trusting ourselves, trusting that our gut feeling might be right sometimes and the expert might be wrong, feels more dangerous than trusting the fraud. Trusting ourselves becomes an indictment, even when the frauds are killing us. So here's where we change it up, or not changing it up. I'm saying, I wrote a piece on this earlier this year that I think there are credentials and I think there are people out there, but I trust my knowing and my gut many times over the credentials, or at least I'm learning to. It's not a switch you flip, it's not a decision you make once and you're done. It's a series of small little rebellions and small moments where you choose to trust yourself instead of deferring your life and your health and your sanity and your financial security to someone that sounds more sure than you feel. And it all starts with one question: what if I'm right? Not, I know I'm right. Not, I'm definitely right and they're definitely wrong. Just that simple 2-word question: what if? What if the doctor dismissed my pain as wrong and I'm right? Because who's more of the authority over your body than you? I live in this body. I inhabit this body, I'm pretty sure, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I'm pretty sure what's going on with myself. So to sit in front of a doctor and him say, no, that's not what's happening, it incenses me. What if the therapist who tells me to forgive is wrong and I'm right to still be angry with some people? What if the boss who tells me that my workload is normal is wrong and I'm right that it's killing me physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally? What if the expert who contradicted my lived experience doesn't actually know my life better than I do? What if? I've had the blessing of being able to travel this earth and live in different cultures, and then have had the absolute horrific experience in sitting in front of a TV and watching a man who's never left the USA for any further shore than the Caribbean tell me that this is how things work in the Middle East. I don't know how things work entirely in the Middle East from having been there. How can you know from never having been there? How can you understand the people? How can you understand the economy? How can you understand the culture? How can you understand anything? It all starts with the what if and the trusting of yourself. Again, what if? Because that's where everything starts, with the question, not the answer, not the certainty, not the confidence, the question. And that's everything that my writing is about, is the question, not the certainty of an answer. When we settle on the certainty of one answer, we've given away immeasurable power. We've given away so much possibility. And that's what I beg everybody to do, is to stand in the question. The question. The questions feel dangerous. They feel like doubt. They look like you're questioning your own sanity for even entertaining the possibility that you might know something they don't. But what if the doubt's not a weakness? What if the doubt is just the beginning of trusting yourself? Or if you're religious or spiritual or even not, that there's something deeper than what goes on in this little noggin of ours that's constantly feeding information to us. That when we get that little niggling doubt, or we get that little sharp sensation, when we get that little tug, that we're maybe being told something from our subconscious, or maybe even further back. What if questioning somebody else's authority is the first step towards claiming your own? What if? You were born with instincts. You know that. I hope you know that. You were born with a body that knows when something's wrong before your brain can ever catch up to it. There's this nervous system that picks up on a danger that you can't articulate. There's a gut that screams warnings that you've been trained to ignore. We have now learned that part of our nervous system sits in our gut, and it has a reasoning and thinking ability all its own. And, on some level that's funny. On another level, that's amazing. There's another nerve center, another information center sitting in our guts that is trained to tell us things, to give us signals, to warn us. That tightness in your chest when someone's talking to you, that's not random. That's information. That knot in your stomach when you're about to say yes to something, that's not anxiety. That's your body telling you something. That is information. The voice in your head that says this doesn't feel right, that's not always paranoia. That's pattern recognition. Your body has been keeping you alive your entire life. It's been collecting data. It's been learning. It's been remembering. It's been storing things. It's been telling you every time someone lied to you, your body noticed. It's been telling you that every time you ignored your instincts and regretted it, I remember. Every time you said yes when you meant no, your body tallied up a score. And it's trying to tell you things that you have learned to ignore, that I have learned to ignore, because a voice of authority is telling me not to. And the question here is, are you listening? Are you listening? Now, what does it look like to listen to this? Not to override, not to defer, not to convince yourself you're wrong because someone with credentials said so, but to actually listen to what your body is telling you. To treat that tightness in your chest as information, and excuse me, instead of something you need to push down, instead of something you need to quell. To treat that knot in your stomach as wisdom instead of weakness. And to treat that voice in your head as something worth investigating instead of something worthy of dismissal. What would change in my life or your life if we did that? I am in no way saying expertise doesn't matter. I'm asking simply, what if your lived experience matters more than anyone's theory about it? A doctor can know medicine. They can be brilliant at it. But do they know your body better than you do? A therapist can know psychology. But do they know your mind better than you do? An expert can know their field. But do they know your life better than you do? What if the answer to that is no? What if you're the authority of your own experience? What if you don't need someone with a degree to validate what you already know instinctively? And what if trusting yourself isn't what we've been taught it is? What if it's not arrogance? What if it's the opposite? Arrogance is thinking you know better than everyone. But trusting your own knowing, that's humility. That's the opposite. That's recognizing that you're the only one that has lived your life, the only one inside your body, the only one that has to deal with the consequences of ignoring your instincts. What if trusting yourself is just being honest about what you know? What if most of the time your instincts are right? That gut feeling that something's off, what if it's usually off? The sense that somebody's lying, what if they usually are? That suspicion that you're being taken advantage of, what if you are? What if your instincts aren't random or irrational or evidence of you being broken? What if they're your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping you alive and keeping you healthy? What if that system is better at its job than any expert will ever be? And we need to think about this. This system that is installed in us has had hundreds of thousands of years to perfect itself, which is longer than any doctor has ever been to school. It's longer than any mechanic's ever been to school. It's longer than any psychiatrist or any authority, any politician has ever been to school. This system that is installed within us is about as close to perfection as we're going to get. So what would it look like to trust that? Not blindly or arrogantly, and not by rejecting expertise, because I think we have to listen to the real experts. I think we have to bring new knowledge and new information into our systems. But we treat it as what it is, as input, not gospel, not rules, input. By listening to the doctor, the therapist, the advisor, and then checking their advice against our own expertise. Does this feel right? Does this match what I'm seeing? Does this align with what I know about myself? Does this align with what I know about the world? Does this align with my experience? Does this align with the things I've seen and witnessed and other information that has come into my life that says differently? And if it doesn't, what if you're allowed to say no? What if you're allowed to get a second opinion? What if you're allowed to trust that you could know yourself better than any stranger ever could? Excuse me. I started asking these questions when I stopped apologizing for having them. When a doctor dismissed my symptoms, I asked, what if you're wrong? And then I found another doctor, and they were wrong. And when a therapist told me I needed to forgive someone who was still hurting me, I asked, what if that's not what I need right now? And then I left. And it wasn't what I needed at that point. And if a boss gives you a workload that's not normal and you ask, what if your normal is killing me? Maybe it is. And maybe you need to find something else. When an expert contradicts my lived experience, I ask, what if my experience is more true than their theory? And that's the truth of it. What if my experience is more true than their theory? And sometimes when you stop listening, you'll find that that's the truth. Every time I ask a question, something within me moves. It's not immediate. There's no revelation. There's no real, flash in the sky. But I start trusting the answers that I was getting from myself more than the answers that I'm getting from the authorities. And that knowing, it gets stronger. That listening to yourself gets stronger. Again, the questions. What if you're the authority of your own life? Not a doctor, not a politician, not a therapist, not a boss, not an expert with a platform, not me, not a book deal, not a TED talk, not a seminar, not a nature retreat. You. What if you are the authority of your own life? What if you're the one that has to live in your body, so you're the one that knows it best? What if you are the one that has to live with your choices, so you're the one that gets to make them? What if you're the one who knows what you can survive and what you can't? And what if nobody, no matter how many degrees they have, knows that better than you? What if, when your knowing and their expertise conflict, you're allowed to trust yourself? What if your gut says no and their credentials say yes, and you're allowed to trust your gut? What if you're on a date and every signal you're getting from this guy is that he's poison and he's dangerous, and you're allowed to get up and say, no, I choose no? What if your instincts scream danger and their authority says you're overreacting, and you're allowed to trust your instincts? What if you were born with everything you need to survive this life? And you need to think on this question, because we are. It's one of those truths. What if you're born with everything you need to survive this life? Because we've been doing it for thousands of years. We were born with everything we need to survive. It's installed within us. The ability to see danger, the ability to sense danger, the ability to recognize patterns, the ability to know when something's wrong, even when we can't really articulate why. Even when we can't speak to why, we know that something's wrong. What if that's not weakness or naivety or evidence you need more expertise? What if we treat that like what it is, wisdom? And what if we learn to trust that? What if, what if trusting your knowing gets stronger the more you use it? What if it's a muscle, just like a bicep or a leg or any other muscle? What if trusting that knowing gets stronger the more every time we use it? The first time you say no to an authority who dismisses you, it feels terrifying. You doubt yourself. You wonder if you're making a mistake. But what if you do it anyway? And then what if you find an authority that actually listens? What if you find a doctor that makes you better, or a therapist that suits you better? And what if next time it's a little easier? The first time you walk away from a job that's killing you, it feels reckless, it feels stupid, you panic about money, you wonder if you're throwing everything away. I have been there. But what if you do it anyway? And what if you find work that doesn't destroy you? And what if your life gets better? And what if the next time it's a little easier? The first time you trust your instincts over someone's credentials, over someone's authority, it feels like absolute rebellion. But what if you do it anyway? And what if you're right? And the next time it gets stronger, and the next time it's not rebellion, it's just the way you live. It's just you assuming that authority over your own life. What if you don't actually need permission to trust yourself? What if you don't need credentials to know what is true about your life? What if you don't need an expert to validate your experience before you're allowed to act on it? And what if you were born with instincts, with knowing, with whatever you want to call it, with the ability to sense what's right for you and what's wrong for you? And what if no degree, no title, no authority, no years of experience can replace that? So what if you trusted it? So what if you trusted the voice in your head that says this doesn't feel right? What if you trusted the knot in your stomach that says, don't do this, man, don't do this? What if you trusted the tightness in your chest that says, this person is deceiving me? What if you trusted this knowing? Again, not because you're always right, but because you're the one that has to live with the consequences of these actions. And you're the one that has to live with the consequences of ignoring these feelings. You're the one that has to live in this body and this mind. So my vow this year is I will trust my knowing over authority and over the credentials of someone else. Not as certainty, but as an inquiry. Not as arrogance, but as honesty. Not as rejection of expertise or rebellion, but as a reclamation of my own authority. I will question and I will ask and I will wonder and I will stand there and stare at the sky in awe. And I will listen to my body and I will trust my instincts and I will believe my own eyes and my own heart. I will treat the advice as input, but I will not treat it as a rule. I will respect expertise without learning to worship it. And I will seek help without surrendering myself to that help. I will remember that I was born into this life with everything that I need to survive it. And I will stop apologizing for knowing myself better than anyone, especially a stranger, ever could. Not because I'm arrogant, but because I'm alive. And being alive means asking the question, what if? Again, day 40, thank you for being here. All I ask is that you trust yourself today, question somebody with a title, and ask yourself, what if? See you tomorrow for day 5.